Hey, you all, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to the No-Till Market Garden Podcast, episode 14. So, you already know Andrew Mefferd from his ridiculously good debut book, The Greenhouse and Hoop House Grower's Handbook, which I inexplicably call a guide several times in this interview, but it is a handbook, and it is an awesome one at that. Or maybe you know him from being the editor of the critically important Growing for Market magazine. But what you may not realize is that Andrew has a whole history with no-till growing and has just published a new book on the subject called The Organic No-Till Farming Revolution: High Production Methods for Small-Scale Farmers through New Society Publishers, and it is great. So in today's interview, we get into all that, why the word organic is in there, and Andrew tells us about some of the different growers he talks to for his book, and also his plans to do no-till wholesale at One Drop Farm in Maine. Very cool stuff. First, my buddy Ray Tyler down at Rose Creek Farm is offering a lettuce masterclass, and you all, Jackson and I have been cruising around this thing, getting a little preview, and it is so ridiculously good. First, Ray should have been doing videos for years. He's just a joyful and charismatic and brilliant lettuce grower, but the information, the resources there, I know for us at Rough Draft Farmstead, summer lettuce in particular is the most valuable thing we grow, and I learned how to grow summer lettuce by talking to Ray. And now you can learn how to grow lettuce year-round from one of the great mentors on the subject. There is a free workshop that starts February 11th, and then enrollment in the masterclass starts February 18th and goes through the 22nd, and I'm talking 2019. But if you're listening to this at any time, they will be reopening the enrollment regularly, so go check it out. Go check the link. I will have that in the show notes. And just a note here, if you sign up for that class, they kick a few bucks back to the show. So learn how to grow lettuce, support the show. It's a pretty sweet deal. Just use our link or let them know at checkout where you found them. All right, let's get to the show with Andrew Mefferd of One Drop Farm, Growing for Market, and this awesome new book. Andrew Mefferd, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Jesse. Great to be here.
Yeah, man, super excited to have you on. I love the new book, and I can't wait to get into it with you. But first, I was kind of hoping we could just start by you giving us a little rundown of where you are and of One Drop Farm.
Yeah, sure. Well, the thing that takes up most of my time these days is editing Growing for Market magazine, which I do from my farm, which is in central Maine. We're in a little town called Cornville. My farm is called One Drop Farm. And so for many years we did direct marketed produce, and we have made a huge transition on the farm, partially to accommodate taking over Growing for Market, because I did take the magazine over from the founder and original editor in 2016. So I've been doing it ever since then, and we found ourselves in this unusual situation in 2016 where not only did we have the opportunity to take over Growing for Market, but also an established nursery grower here in central Maine who is really locally famous for her just extensive line of varieties of plants that you could get. She had the kind of nursery where you would have 10 or 15 different varieties of peppers, and I don't know if we do 50 varieties of tomatoes now, but she ran the kind of nursery where it's not like you walk in and there's only red round tomatoes. She ran the kind of nursery that just had all the diversity that most commercial nurseries don't, and so we were approached by this grower. So that in that same year, 2016, she asked us if we wanted to take over her nursery because she was just ready to step back. And so in 2016, we both took over Growing for Market and this nursery, which we just incorporated into our existing business because we had already been doing a fair amount of nursery as a lot of vegetable and flower farms do. So just to get the cash flow going in the springtime, we always did. We would sell vegetable and flower starts at our farmers market and off the farm also. And so essentially what we did. So in 2016, for the first time, we did not do retail produce, and we just increased the size of our nursery. And another reason we made that change, which was absolutely essential, because looking back, there was just no way. 2016 ended up being a really crazy year for us. Because we took over the magazine and took over someone's nursery business in the same year. So in retrospect, it would have been crazy. We would have lost our minds if we tried to do the produce that we are also growing. But part of the other change was that I'm becoming more interested in doing local wholesaling, just because I feel like our markets around here are getting kind of saturated, and that's something I'm hearing from a lot of market farmers everywhere. And so we were already thinking about maybe developing a relationship with our local grocery store chain, because that's somewhere that they have organic produce 365 days a year. It's just not usually from central Maine, right? And so it really kind of got me thinking that a way to reach all those people who don't come to the farmers market, it would be through the grocery store. And I feel like that's a trend. We've had some articles in Growing for Market lately about getting into wholesaling for smaller growers, because I still think that farmers markets and CSAs are going to be the backbone of local food. But I think that having smaller farms than we've traditionally thought of selling to grocery stores and wholesaling like that, whether it be through a direct relationship with the grocery store or an indirect one through, say, a food hub or some other kind of aggregator, I think it's going to be I think that's going to be one of the ways to grow, keep the number of market farms growing, and also increase the amount of produce in local stores that is organic. And so, sort of, it's part of that trend that I see going on in local farms in general. I want to be a part of that trend on my own farm, and so that's just been something that we're trying to figure out. That's the thing about the wholesaling, is that we would need. We're trying to figure out our markets. Of course, we want to figure out where the produce is going before we grow it. And so the other part of that that's relevant to our conversation today is that if I were to find those markets, I would want to be doing it no-till. And so I've been experimenting with some of the methods that I interviewed people about for the book, and so that would be my idea. Now that I've gotten the chance to visit with a lot of people and see the gamut of what people are doing for no-till currently, I'm sure there are other things that people are going to figure out, and there are going to be more innovations coming down the pike. But I feel like from the process of interviewing, I ended up interviewing 20 or so growers for the 17 interviews that made it into the book, because for space considerations, we just couldn't fit them all in there. So I feel like I have a pretty good idea of what people are doing right now that made me feel comfortable about saying that, okay, well, this is what's available right now. I'll pick one or more of these methods to use no-till on my own farm. So that's my situation. The magazine is people are interested in the magazine. It's at growingformarket.com. And then if people want to see what we're doing on our farm, it's onedropfarm.com, onedropfarm.com. There's a lot of information about our farm on our website, but a nice thing is that with the nursery, we have an online ordering system, so that people can pre-order nursery plants from us, and they pay a 50% deposit up front. So they order them through the website, and then we have a week or two at the end of May, which is our everybody's supposed to come pick up their pre-orders that week, and that's when we really open up the farm and plan on having a lot of visitors because because we inherited an established customer base. We have people that come from all over the state and a little bit from bordering states, because we do have an unusual selection of things in our nursery. And so we just open up the farm those 2 weeks, and know we're going to have a lot of visitors, and people come get their plants those weeks. So that's what I'm involved in right now, and that's the direction I feel like in the future of our farm. And I'm excited that I from the book, I feel like I have a lot of good solutions that I think we're going to be able to do what we want to do in using no-till techniques. And so that's what we're doing now. People can check it out.
So 2 questions about that. What about how many acres are you looking at for your sort of, you said small scale wholesale, and then what are some of the methods that you're kind of experimenting with and thinking are going to work best on your property?
Yeah, sure. Well, the acreage really depends on what kind of a contract we would get, because on a smaller if it were a smaller contract, we could just use our existing greenhouses and hoop houses, and the crops that are near and dear to my heart. I love tomatoes and the other vining fruiting crops. If anybody's familiar with my previous book, the Greenhouse and Hoop House Growers Handbook, I go on quite a bit about vining fruiting crops in that book, because I love them. Although that book focuses on the vining fruiting crops, so peppers, tomatoes, chukes, and eggplant, and it also focuses on the greens crops, so lettuce, greens, microgreens, and herbs, because those are the 8 crops that I really pay the bills in a lot of greenhouses. And so what I would be looking to do is to grow organic tomatoes, or potentially cucumbers, or another vining fruiting crop for wholesale, that I would like to deliver wholesale to grocery stores in our area, so they could do the marketing for us, and then we'd be providing a nice, high quality, good flavor, organic, locally grown product for them, where they probably don't have one, or don't have one for a lot of the year right now. So if it were a smaller contract, or I could also say the indoor portion of the contract, I've been using occultation in our greenhouses and hoop houses. So listeners to your podcast probably already know that occultation is a fancy word for tarping. Basically, just putting a tarp down in times of the year when I either have part of the greenhouse fallow, or have weeds from a previous crop or something like that. Whereas in the past, I would have gone in and with a rototiller and just ground everything up and added compost and amendments at that point and mixed them into the soil. What I've realized is that I really don't think that I need to incorporate those those amendments to have them be effective. And so the approach that I've taken since doing these interviews is in the greenhouse to essentially use the tarps as a placeholder, right? If I have an area that's not going to be planted for a couple weeks, in the past, instead of rototilling it up, I'll just put the tarp down, because that will germinate the weeds if it's either moist or I can. I've been irrigating. Actually, I have some tarps down out in a hoop house that's frozen right now, and I just left the irrigation system down under the tarps. So, and I was watering in there during the summer specifically to germinate weed seeds, and then they germinate under that tarp, and they just die. And so I've been messing around with occultation in the greenhouses and hoop houses as a way to change my soil prep. And it's worth noting that another thing that we talk about in the book, and you probably have on the podcast, is solarization. So instead of using an opaque tarp, for the occultation or the tarping. If I were to have a smaller window of time, let's say I needed to turn a crop around really quickly, take out a greens crop and plant a vining fruiting crop in its place, and I only had a day or a few days. What I would do is just use an old piece of greenhouse plastic. I would use a clear tarp to solarize that. So essentially burn the weeds up that are in that space. And I know that can work really quickly, especially in a greenhouse, because one of my visits in particular was with Brian O'Hara. He's got Tobacco Road Farm in Connecticut, and he had been working with all kinds of no-till methods, including clear tarps, for many, many years. I don't want to say he's had a farm there for over 20 years. I don't know how long he's been using the tarps, but he had been using these clear pieces of old greenhouse plastic. And so he figured out that he could do really quick bed turnovers with clear tarps, as long as it was I think he said it was as long as it was sunny and in the 70s. So sort of like spring summer weather here in New England, because he's down in Connecticut. He said that as long as it was warm and sunny enough, he could get rid of the weeds that were in a bed by solarizing. And so, since in a hoop house you have that extra warmth, that would probably work for even more of the year. So if I had to do a quick turnover, I guess that's it. If I had to do a quick turnover, I would use solarization and potentially be able to kill the weeds within 24 hours. Or if I had more time, one of the things that I love about the occultation or the tarping is that it's so quick and easy to do. It's easy to just throw the tarps down and just leave them down as a placeholder until you're ready to deal with the bed, because of course it'll be preventing any weeds from growing there. It'll be smothering whatever's already growing there and potentially germinating and immediately smothering any weed seeds that would germinate under there. And I know one thing a lot of people have asked me about on the solarization is well, if you're going to all these lengths to preserve your soil life, aren't you just killing them again by people are particularly concerned about solarization, which I think is a really valid concern. If one of the real advantages that I see for no-till is that you're not grinding up your soil life on a regular basis, which of course some stuff survives, but the tilling, the action of tilling is particularly hard on the fungal component of your soil. So if you think really broadly about the life that lives in your soil, you've got a fungal component and a bacterial component, and then all the other invertebrates and different things that live in the soil. And it's particularly hard on and tilling is particularly hard on the fungal component of the soil, because the way the fungus grows, it has these long hyphae, and when you till it, it goes in there and chops the fungal hyphae up, and it kills everything, but it seems like it's particularly hard on the fungal component of the soil, whereas the bacteria and some of the other invertebrates are more likely to survive. In fact, a very simplified version of what I've come to understand is happening when you do those cycles of tillage is that you're killing a lot of everything in the soil, but then the bacteria that survive feed on the dead fungus and dead invertebrates and things that you've just killed with your tillage. And so a lot of people think that there is an advantage to having more balanced soils because there are roles that bacteria and invertebrates play in keeping our soil healthy, and there's also a role that fungus has to play in keeping our soil healthy. and so that that's one of the things that happens if you're tilling a lot. You're creating an environment that's more favorable for bacteria by constantly killing the fungal component, and that's really to our detriment. There are a lot of benefits. There's somebody else who could be, somebody who knows more about fungus could do a much better job of explaining it. But apparently, a lot of the things that help soil to aggregate, right, instead of just being dust, fungus does a lot to stick our soil together in the nice kind of aggregate that we all want to see in our soils, that sticks together, does blow away, doesn't erode, and also helps with water infiltration. So that's one of the things that is hurting our soils essentially is if you're killing the whole fungal component of your soil every 6 months or whatever. You're not getting the benefit in you're creating a soil that's skewed towards the bacteria, right? So we're very, one of the benefits, as far as I'm concerned, of no-till is that it's friendlier on the soil life, and so I was concerned about what might be going on, particularly with something like solarization, where you get really high temperatures for a short period of time. And so I was talking with Brian down at Tobacco Road Farm about this, and he was very concerned about this too. And so what he did is he took a soil thermometer probe, and so he took the probe and stuck it just barely through the clear plastic. So on a hot sunny day, he was solarizing, and so he just punctured the plastic with the tip of the probe a little bit. So I forget what he got. I forget what the number is. That's be worth reading the book for. I think he said there was the soil temperature right in the top, quarter inch of the soil or something was over 100 degrees, right? So very, very hot. Definitely plants and other things in that very, very top part of the soil are dying. But he said that he pushed the probe down a little bit more, and it very quickly turned to a normal soil temperature. Because if you think about it, soil is not a very good conductor. There's a lot of airspace. It's not a good conductor of heat, and so I think you're overheating the very top most part of your soil. But if you contrast it with, say, tillage, you are disrupting a much smaller portion of the soil than you would with rototilling, right? The contrast would be disrupting the top, quarter inch of the soil or something with a method like solarization versus disrupting the top 7 or 8 inches of the soil. People till at all different depths, so I guess you can insert your own tillage depth there, but you're certainly disturbing the soil less and with say solarization versus tillage. So I guess I try to keep an open mind about tillage. Jesse, you wrote a review of my book for the magazine a few weeks ago, and one of the things you pointed out in the review was that I really tried hard not to. I think you said I tried hard not to denigrate tillage, because I realized I've written this book talking about ways to get away from what almost everybody does. Tillage is such a paradigm in farming, right? I think I worked on a number of farms before I started my own farm. They all were tilling. In fact, that's why I sought out the experience that I had on a no-till research farm, because I was looking for alternatives and I just wasn't seeing them. So I realized that I'm writing this book saying that what most people are doing is not really ideal. And so I want not so much to say that everybody's doing the wrong thing. I want to talk about what the disadvantages are of tillage and think about whether using a different system and avoiding those disadvantages would be more helpful for people or not. And so because I realize some people will be tilling and they'll be skeptical, and so that's why I say with this whole no-till thing, I'm very interested in it personally. I think I think there's a lot of benefits that small farms could have from no-till, but it's not like I'm not proselytizing here. I'm not saying everybody's got to do this. I just think that there are a lot of operations that fall into a category that would benefit from it, and so I want to put this information out there, and that's why I did a series of interviews, because there's many ways to skin the no-till cat, right? And so I wanted to I didn't want to say oh there's one way to do no-till. There are many different ways to do no-till, and one of the things that I noticed in the book is most people use a combination of multiple strategies to do no-till, right? Almost nobody is just using occultation or solarization. Most people are using occultation or solarization to kill weeds and get beds prepped in the first place, but most people are also using some form of mulch, either a mulch grown in place and then rolled and crimped down in place, or a mulch that's applied to the soil, like straw or a deep mulch of compost or something like that, to suppress the weeds and fertilize the crop during that growing part of the cycle, right? So the fact that most people are just kind of are using hybrid systems that are using multiple different of the strategies that I talk about in the book. I really just want people to think about what the advantages could be, what applies to their situation, and then go try something. Because that's where people the proof in that's where people will see the benefit if they find a method that works for their own farm. And then I would never say that someone who's should go and completely change their system in 1 year. I'd say people should try a few beds, and if it works out better, then they can keep increasing that.
Hey, you all, just going to jump in here real quick and say that if you are enjoying this podcast, make sure to sign up for the Patreon page. We're trying to get that to at least $1,000 per month by May to afford a second season of this show. Is this show worth $2 a month to you? 10? I mean, $2 a month would put each episode at what, like 50 cents? 50 cents an episode? Can you Venmo us? Venmo. It's an app. Can you Venmo us a couple bucks here or there? Show your support. That helps too. In fact, whatever you can do, we appreciate it. All right, back to Andrew.
Yeah, I agree, and we should describe a little bit about how the book's set up, but essentially you do a good job in the very beginning of that book of kind of describing some of these different no-till systems, and then all the different examples from the people. You kind of get to see it from their eyes and all the different things they maybe tried, and there's a lot of examples in there. You wrote the Greenhouse and Hoop House Grower's Guide, which I think is such a great book. I often find, and I think it was true for our farm, that no-till often starts in the tunnels. There's not a lot of room to move with a BCS or a tractor. It can be kind of a little bit difficult. So that for us was a really logical place to start taking tillage out of the picture. So it's kind of a funny natural progression for you to go from, the Hoop House Greenhouse Grower's Guide to the no-till book. Did you see a lot of that sort of no-till tunnel work in your researching for that first book?
No, not at all, actually. Because the research for that first book was just me doing my job. I didn't before writing the Greenhouse and Hoop House Growers Handbook. I didn't go into that book thinking, oh, I'm going to write a book. So, to provide a little background on that, what led up to me writing the Greenhouse and Hoop House Growers Handbook was that we were simply farming here in central Maine, and of course we have a very short season up here in Maine. And before that, we had been farming in Pennsylvania, and since my favorite crops are those heat-loving vining, fruiting crops, we had a much longer season in Pennsylvania for outdoor tomatoes and stuff like that. And to the point where I live, I really don't think it's worth planting a commercial crop of tomatoes outside. Or maybe a mid-season crop of determinants or something like that. But our season is just so short, and it's and relatively cool, that I feel like by the time, if you grow those big vining, heirlooms and big vining beefsteaks out in the field, they're really only starting to ripen around the time it's starting to cool off again up here. And so that's the things that led me to write the Greenhouse and Hoop House Growers Handbook was A, moving from Pennsylvania to Maine, B, and so then having to rely more and more on season extension for those kind of fruiting crops that we had a lot of demand for at the farmers market. And the other thing was working at Johnny's. Almost as soon as we moved to Maine, I started working for Johnny's Selected Seeds, and so in the research department. And so I was doing trials on tomatoes and other crops, and I got more and more focused there. Until by the time I left, I was a greenhouse specialist because we were seeing so much interest and demand from market farmers just wanting information and more varieties for protected growing, and that was one of my interests. So I didn't write the Greenhouse and Hoop House Growers Handbook after a process of saying, it wasn't an orderly process of me saying, oh, I'm gonna research and write this book. It was a process of moving farther north, needing more season extension. And then the final thing was that when I was at Johnny's, I just had access to different people. I had access to university researchers, seed company people, bigger commercial growers who knew a lot more than I did. And so it was a lot of fun for me to work at Johnny's because it gave me an excuse to ask a lot of people. It gave me the access to a lot of people to ask a lot of questions. And so I just learned so much while I was there at Johnny's. And then another part of my job at Johnny's is I was supposed to troubleshoot people's questions. If they had, specifically when I was doing a lot of work on greenhouse, if people had greenhouse questions or questions about the varieties that we were selling, and let's say you call into the Johnny's and the person, mostly commercial growers who are answering the phone there in the wintertime, if those people couldn't answer your question, it was going to come on to me. And so what I noticed was just I was getting the same questions over and over again. I even thought, oh, somebody should write a book about this. A few times before finally I started that process. So whereas the no-till book was really, I said, what really happened was that I guess I should back up a little bit, but mainly I just want to say that it was a fairly logical research process for me to write the organic no-till farming revolution, because with that book, I'm just going to back up here and say almost 15 years ago now, I had worked on a really big organic vegetable farm. It's about 100 acres of organic vegetables. And so besides telling me I never want to manage a farm that big, that for one thing, it was a really great farm, but it's just not the logistical kind of thing that I want to manage. So, but working on this relatively big organic farm, I was just driving a tractor a lot more than I wanted to, right? Because the farm was so big and they had a lot of weeds. There was just constantly a cultivating tractor going. I mean, that could have been a job there just at that farm. This is cultivating tractor driver, just driving around, constantly cultivating. And so I just thought, both from a fossil fuels use perspective, I thought there's got to be something more efficient than this. And I guess a big part of it is just my own inclinations. I'm not a tractor guy, so I know how to drive a tractor. I'm happy that I do, but it's once I started spending so much time driving a tractor, I thought, this isn't how I want to spend my day. And so I thought, well, what are the alternatives? And so that was in 2004. And so at that point in time, if you put no-till into an internet search engine, the main things you would hear about are what the Rodale Institute was doing, along with the U.S. National Resource Conservation Service, because those two organizations were working together to try to find no-till solutions for vegetable growers. And so what happened is that I was out on the West Coast working on that farm in Washington State, and I'm originally from Virginia. And so one of the main people doing no-till research at that time was a really great guy named Professor Ron Morse, and he's retired now, but at the time he was professor at Virginia Tech. And so I was in this situation where every summer I was going off and working on farms, and then I would come back in the wintertime. I had this job there in the Northern Virginia area that would take me back to work for them every winter. So I was going off and apprenticing on farms in the summertime and coming back and working in Northern Virginia to make some cash, because we were trying to start a farm at that point. So I would work in the winter and save money. So I knew I was coming back to Virginia. That would have been the winter of 2004-2005, and so I noticed that there was this guy, Ron Morse, who was doing organic no-till research down at Virginia Tech, which it's a couple hours away from where I'm from in Northern Virginia. And so I thought, what the hey? I just emailed Ron, and he emailed me back and said, why don't you come down and see what we're doing at the university? And I did. And little did I know, it was a job interview. You know, I just asked him if I could come down and pick his brain, and I guess he just needed people to work for him, because he was doing a lot of field trial experiments. So Ron would get money from, let's say, Ron would get money from the NRCS or somewhere else, or sometimes I think seed companies or processors or things, and they would want to know, let's say, can you grow no-till organic broccoli at the same productivity as cleanly tilled, sort of like traditional organic practices? And so what we would do is we would run a trial. You know, we would plant some beds using his no-till planter, and we would plant some beds just cleanly tilled, the way that a lot of organic farmers do with disking and rototilling and whatnot to achieve a clean seed bed. And so we would, plant these beds with different treatments and harvest them, weigh it, and try to tease out what the differences were between the different treatments. And in fact, I have some photos from that period. There's a picture in the book where we have a pickup truck that is just, the bed of the truck is just mounded with broccoli, because that was on a day that we were harvesting and doing yield data on the organic no-till treatments versus the conventionally tilled treatments. And so I should also say that it is part of the reason that we put the word organic into the title of the book, is that I think part of the proof of the value of no-till is in that a huge amount of the conventional corn and soy and a lot of the other row crops has gone over to no-till. Those, in fact, it seems like the conventional row crop growers were some of the first to really adopt no-till technology, but it's really different. What you can do with conventional no-till will not work with organic vegetables and flowers, because in my mind, genetic modification in a way is a way to enable the kind of no-till that conventional ag does, where you plant a genetically modified crop, let the weeds come up, and you take tillage out of the equation. So instead of tilling, what you would have done in the old days, you would have tilled for those weeds. You can simply spray an herbicide over the top and just have them go away. In fact, so that's, in a way, that's how the genetic modification and herbicides, neither of which you can ever use in organic. Genetic modification and herbicides are really what made conventional no-till popular, at least on that large scale. And that's just never gonna be an option for vegetables in the first place, because it's really expensive to develop genetically modified crops at this point. I know people talk a lot about CRISPR and having different ways of doing genetic modification in the future, but still, to develop those crops and also get them approved is just very expensive, and there's probably not the budget, or certainly not with some changes to the way we do agriculture. They're most worthwhile for developing those genetically modified varieties for the big commodity crops, corn and soy and the like. So I don't think you're gonna see that. It's just not really gonna work in organic, or I don't think you'd even see it. Obviously, it wouldn't be organic because you would have genetically modified crops and herbicides, but I don't think you're ever even going to see them developing genetically modified versions of broccoli and stuff because it's the market. I think the market's not big enough. Doesn't really matter. The point is that I saw this firsthand. In fact, I originally started our farm on some land that my grandma had owned in Pennsylvania, and so we started out by leasing 3 acres from my grandma, and the rest of the farm was farmed by our closest neighboring dairy farmer. And so I noticed this one spring he had planted a soybean in a field that was pretty close to ours, and I just noticed that the soybeans came up, and right behind the soybeans the weeds came up, and pretty quickly the weeds overgrew the soybeans. And I was not wise to this at the time, and so I thought, oh no, he's going to lose his soybeans. The weeds have grown over the soybeans, and so silly me. Of course, he had planted genetically modified soybeans. So after all the weeds came up, a couple weeks later he came by and sprayed over the top of everything, and so of course what happened is that all the weeds died, and the genetically modified soybeans survived it because they were genetically modified to survive the herbicide. And so that right there, I mean, that's how conventional no-till works, and something I never would, that would not be, as an organic grower, of course, that's nothing I would ever aspire to. But that's why we need to make a very big distinction between the techniques that work for big commodity crops like that have been genetically modified, and the techniques that are going to work for everybody else. So that's why we thought it was important in the title to make that distinction, because it's organic no-till is a whole different range of practices to get it to work than works for the huge conventional acreages.
Hey, just a quick note that if you buy Andrew's book from growingformarket.com, you get a 20% discount. Also, if you are listening to this episode when it comes out, we are giving away a free copy over at Instagram this week. Yes, a free copy of the book, and yes, it's only on Instagram. Find the photo, follow the instructions, win a copy, super easy. See, it pays to be subscribed to the podcast, so you get this stuff when it comes out. Otherwise, if you're listening to this, a couple months from now, the contest is long over. So just saying. All right, back to Andrew.
I'd love to hear some of these models that you went to see and that you've written about. Are there some that kind of surprised you? Did they kind of change your perception of no-till? Like, what are some of the sort of surprising and exciting sort of methods that you saw when you were speaking with these different farmers?
Yeah, that's a good question. Some of it I was a little bit surprised at. After working on the research farm at Virginia Tech, and they were doing the roller crimper method. People may be familiar, where if you're not, what you do is you grow a really dense cover crop. Most frequently it's rye or vetch or a combination, and a lot of other crops are possible. I think people just use rye because it's a good grower. It creates a lot of biomass, and it's widely available. So the no-till method that I learned originally was this roller crimper method. And there's a good book out there by Jeff Moyer, who is at the Rodale Institute, called Organic No-Till Farming. And that's that method. So that's actually why in the book I don't focus on the roller crimper method. I do interview a few people who use the roller crimper method, and I also I also interviewed some people who took the roller crimper method and built on it and sort of added some things to deal with the limitations of the roller crimper method. But what happened is that I learned this method, and then I realized that it wasn't going to work for the farm that I was about to start, because since we started out with about 3 acres of mostly vegetables, we were in the same situation that a lot of market gardeners are in, whereas we had a lot of successions. We were planting the same crops over and over again, week to week, to try to always have salad mix and radishes or whatever your short cycle crops are. And so the main thing about the roller crimper method is that it only gives you a few planting windows, because you have to plant when you can mechanically kill that cover crop. Because what you're doing is you're growing all that biomass in place, then you're killing it, rolling it down. What you've done is you've grown your mulch in place. Instead of, say, bringing straw in from somewhere else and throwing straw all over the ground, you're growing it right there and you're just killing it. But because you don't have access to herbicides, if you did, that you could spray it anytime and kill it, but that's not what we're doing. You need to do your roller and crimping at a time when the crop will die. So if people are familiar with rye, it's such a strong grower. The idea, the time when you can kill rye mechanically is when it is starting to flower. But there's a very sweet spot there where if you roll it too early, if you roll it while it's still growing in green growth, it will actually bounce back and start growing again. It will not die, and so then you can't plant other stuff there. And if you roll it too late, then it will, in the flowering process, then it will have set seed. And so there's only a limited number of planting windows for the roller crimper style of no-till. And so if you need a planting window every single week during the growing season or every other week, you're obviously it's not going to work for that. So note the roller crimper style works really well for what it's designed to do. In fact, I meant to mention earlier, Jesse, when you were asking me about how I might like to apply no-till on my own farm, I meant to say that if I were to get a bigger contract for, let's say, tomatoes up here in Maine, the thing that's occurred to me is that I could start the season with a big planting of greenhouse or hoop house tomatoes, using more like just occultation or solarization to deal with the weeds in a hoop house. And then I thought one way to really get a big volume of tomatoes all at once, like a big volume of mid-season tomatoes, would be to do a planting of determinate tomatoes. Indeterminates would work as well. I'm just thinking of trying to minimize my own labor costs, but there's no reason. I should clarify. I'm thinking of determinate, but you could also do indeterminate by using the roller crimper method. So what I would do is I would have a cover crop of vetch planted, and then I could go out and crimp it down, and then plant. And then you can just plant your tomato transplants straight into the mulch. I mean, it's essentially like you had applied straw, except instead of having to source all that straw, either buy it from somebody else or bale it yourself, you just grow it in where you want it to be, and then you roller crimp it down. And this works surprisingly well. Honestly, when I was working with it almost 15 years ago at Virginia Tech, I was a little skeptical because I was working on this farm, right, and they had these fields of rye that they were gonna roll down, and so I'm looking at the rye. You know, it's a huge stand of very healthy, high biomass cereal rye, right? So I'm looking at this field of rye growing gangbusters, and they're saying, yeah, we're gonna plant this tomatoes in a couple weeks, and I'm thinking, I was one of the people who was going to be putting the tomatoes in, so I was thinking, how is this really going to work? How easy is this going to be? But it works pretty well. As long as you hit that rye at the right time with your roller crimper, sure enough, it can both make a lot of biomass and be quite dead by the time that you need to put the tomatoes in there. And so their solution on a larger scale, Ron and some other people had designed a no-till planter, which there are pictures of in the book, which is essentially a modified water wheel transplanter, where you just put some straight coulters in front of the shanks that create a planting channel. So you could either drag a no-till planter through this high residue situation, or one other thing that they tried that would be a little bit less mechanized, that might work for more small farms, is to drag a tractor through that had like fertilizer knives on it, with coulters in front of it. So with any of this mechanized stuff, I mean, you can probably guess, but it's worth saying that if you're doing any kind of tractor work in the high residue bed situation that no-till is going to give you, extra coulters are things to cut through the residue are going to be absolutely essential to keep your equipment from not just clogging up with dead grass and residue. And so, in fact, what they did one time that worked really well, that could work really well for a small farm, is that they rigged up. They wanted to create a transplanting aid for a big field of tomatoes. And so what they did is they just took a tractor, they took a toolbar, and they took, in fact, I think they were fertilizer knives. And this may be something that organic farmers, once again, aren't familiar with. I think it was even fertilizer knives. So like they have these knives called anhydrous knives that in row crop production they apply anhydrous ammonia as a fertilizer. And so what they did is they were not using anhydrous ammonia, but what those shanks are, they're a real sturdy shank. They can kind of provide you with something that is very sturdy that you can build onto. And so what they did is that they used these fertilizer knives, and they got somebody in the shop to modify them, and they welded little 1 or 2 inch wings onto the fertilizer knives that went out from the knife in either direction. And so they were designed they would pull the knives with the coulters in front of them through the high rye residue, and all that would do is it would loosen up that soil that did still have a lot of rye roots in it. So that was my concern as one of the people who was going to be planting these tomatoes, is that I was going to be out there trying to put a tomato transplant in the ground that was really firm with leftover roots from the rye. And so what they did is they ran this fertilizer knife through, which you could also just use a shank on a cultivator. I think the reason that they use the fertilizer knives is because the fertilizer knives are actually they're actually a heavier duty. They're actually heavier duty than the shank of a cultivator. And so if you aren't familiar with this, you could, if you wanted to see what's out there, you could look at a company like AgriSupply, AgriSupply. They have a lot of this kind of stuff. That if you want to find out what kind of hardware you could get, they have a lot of that kind of stuff. It's not real expensive either. And so it was repurposing these fertilizer knives, and they welded wings onto the knife just to ride 1 or 2 inches below the soil line. So what it did was that where the knife cut through, and for an inch or two on either side, it just loosened up the soil while keeping all the mulch in place. So they would go through, drag the knife through the soil. You would go out there. It didn't look like the mulch hadn't really been disturbed, other than cutting a split in it. The soil didn't look like it had been disturbed that much. Yet it was very quickly loosened in channels. And so we just took all these tomato transplants out there and just were plugging them in. And it was actually really easy. It was like someone I would say it was as easy to put those transplants in, almost as easy as if someone had rototilled it. And yet you've got a lot of residue on the soil that's going to suppress any weeds that are going to come up. and it's easy to plant. And so that's the other part. That's one thing that I thought might be useful on my own farm. If we were to get a bigger contract that needed a whole lot of tomatoes at once, what I have thought about doing is to plant a field or some beds or however many I needed to rye, and then rolling, crimping it down, and you could either go out and just make the holes with a trowel, or I have a tractor and toolbars and stuff like that. In fact, I think that's what I bought. I think I bought anhydrous knives because before I realized that this wasn't really going to work on my farm, I started tooling up. Right? I have a big heavy duty toolbar. I have anhydrous knives. I have straight coulters. I started tooling up to do this because we have a tractor anyway, and only to realize that it wasn't going to work. It's just the planting windows and things like that for the roller crimper no-till just weren't going to work with our style of farming. So I have some of the stuff that I was starting to buy to tool up for it that I haven't really used very much because it didn't end up coming handy. But that, for a small farm, that's where roller crimper style no-till is really going to make sense. If you need a whole field of tomatoes, that would make sense. Go grow a cover crop on it, roller crimp it down, and then plant into it. If you need a whole field of squash, if you need a whole field of pumpkins, those kind of things where if smaller farms have larger plantings, one like the kind of planting where you plant your whole winter squash crop in one week or something like that. That's where roller crimper no-till I think can be very useful because instead of having to go out and plow the ground and get it ready for a big crop of tomatoes or squash or something like that, you can just grow this big cover crop, roller crimp it down, and then do big plantings that way. And I think small farms would be better off doing the smaller plantings, the weekly planting of salad mix or whatever. You're probably better off with one of the other methods as far as aquapation, solarization, and stuff like that. So that's really where the book came from, because after I realized that this no-till system, the roller crimper, wasn't really going to work for my farm, I kind of forgot about it. The next year we started a farm, and then you just get involved in the day-to-day reality of just growing things and keeping your head above water. And I really kind of forgot about no-till until we started running these articles in Growing for Market. In fact, we have a writer, Jane Tanner. She wrote one of the first articles, she interviewed some of the same people that I did, and that led to some of the people writing their own articles for Growing for Market. And so, I realized, I thought, these people figured out how to do what I wanted to do 15 years ago, and I just got discouraged and stopped. And some of these people have been doing it for over 20 years. And so that's what led to the book, because I thought I want to do this on my farm. And so I went out, and so I was very inspired by reading about the articles in Growing for Market. And I thought, all right, well, I want to figure this out for my farm. I just need to read about it and figure out how to do it. So I went out and tried to read about it, and there are articles here and there, but there was no source. There was nothing that would tell you, the pros and cons of different methods and how to figure out which one to use on your own farm. And that's where the book came from. Is I thought, well, this is something I want to read, so I'm going to try and write it. And so that's where, I pitched it to New Society, and they were immediately interested, because I just wanted to know that somebody was going to publish it if I went to the trouble of doing all the interviews, because it was awesome. I love farm tours, but it took up quite a bit of my time. I did a lot of traveling the year before last. I visited most of the farms that I made it in the book, just because I wanted to see it first person. And so that's what led to the much more orderly sort of like research project that of writing the no-till book. In that once I knew that New Society was interested, I just sort of sat down and I contacted everybody that I could who was doing no-till at the time, and of course through the course of doing the project, there's a few farms that I didn't know about when I first started, and it's the kind of thing. Also, people are experimenting with no-till a lot, and people may be going, transitioning their operations. So it's definitely a growing thing. So I know there are people. I'm not trying to say I talk to everybody who's doing no-till. Obviously, that would be impossible. But I tried to talk to a proportionate representation of who is using what methods. As far as in the book, there's a lot more people who are doing solarization and occultation and deep compost mulches than some of the other methods, and that's because I found more people doing solarization and occultation and deep compost mulch than doing roller crimper, which kind of bears out what I thought. As most small farms are probably going to be better off with those methods than rolling crimping. Though I think there are some people who are doing interesting things with roller crimper, and people can read about that. Although what you asked me about what surprised me when doing the method. I mean, it's really the simplicity of the methods is one of the things that surprised me. So I think one of the best examples of this is Bear Mountain Farm out in Oregon. They were just really awesome. I went out there and met with them right at the end of October, or it was in October, and they were just about to have their first frost, and they were really kind and took a lot of time and talked to me about their system and what they were doing. And I was just blown away by the simplicity of their system, because when they get to the end of a crop, so I should say, so Bear Mountain, they're a flower farm, but these techniques would apply just as well to vegetables. And so they just blew me away with the simplicity. It's like they had taken everything out of their system that didn't need to be there until they had a very simple system. What I mean by that is that when let's say we're in the situation where I was there in October, and so let's say they had gotten to the end of a flower crop, and so let's say you have some stems standing that have been harvested from, and maybe some seconds, some flowers some blooms that you didn't take, right? So you're at the end of the season with this bed with with residue from the previous crop on it, and they're not going to use that again till springtime. What they showed me that they would do is they would just tarp the bed down, residue and all. And so they buy their tarps, they do their tarping in strips, and so I forget how wide their beds were, but let's say if their beds are 4 feet wide, they would buy tarps that are 5 feet wide, or maybe a little bit more, because they're applying their tarps to beds that still have a crop on there. They would kind of, if the crop was really big and tough, kind of like sunflowers or something like that, they might knock it down with the scythe or knock it down with something, but they were just putting the tarp on this bed that was just had a lot of residue on it. And instead of worrying about taking the residue off or getting rid of it some way, they essentially were composting in place. They just put a tarp down and let it sit over the winter time. And so their winter is moist enough and warm enough that the life in the soil stays active and just breaks their crop residue down in place. They're basically composting in place. And I thought, that is so beautiful in its simplicity, right? You're not killing, you're not removing the residue at all. All you're doing is bringing out, tarping it down, letting the soil life do the work for you. And they said that they would come back in the springtime and it's all broken down, and they can just put their compost and fertilizer on and plant into that. And I thought I love that kind of thinking. There's not like, how complicated can we possibly make this, and how many steps can we add? How simple can we possibly get? And as far as I'm concerned, that's probably the simplest bed split right there that I've ever seen. It's just tarp it down and come back later. Now, I mean, it's worth noting, of course, if you have a tight turnover, that's not going to work. You're going to have to do something else. But that's one of the things I love about tarping, is that you can just use it as a placeholder. If you have a bed that for any length of time that you're not doing anything with, and you want to prevent it from just sitting there and growing weeds, and also you can encourage that biomass, whatever's left over from the previous crop, to break down simply by tarping it. I think about if you go out onto a lawn and set a bucket down and don't come back for a month. When if you come back a month later and pick that bucket up, you're gonna have a perfect circle of bare soil, and just from covering up what was living there and letting all the life of the soil break it down. So really, what these people have done is just figured out how to make these systems work on a larger scale than the size of the bottom of a bucket. And it's worth noting that it's really important to have healthy soil. One thing that I discussed with them is how, if people had been using a lot of tillage and a lot of chemicals and things like that, it might take a few years for these kind of systems that depend on the soil life to break things down to work. Because if you killed a lot of your soil life, if the soil life is not very active, then of course stuff is going to break down more slowly. But places like Bear Mountain, they had been doing this for a number of years, and so they have really healthy soil. They showed me these beds hadn't been tilled in years, and they've been trying to really build up the fertility and the mineralization and also the soil life. So they've got to the point where they probably have all kinds of fungus and bacteria and invertebrates and everything living there, so that when they tarp it down, it's lunchtime for those guys, right? They just let their soil life. In fact, they even have a name for it. They call them their ground peeps. They're like their ground people. They say that, they're going to let. They talk about tarping stuff down at the end of a season, and they're going to let the ground peeps do that work instead of using the tractor, using the rototiller, and all that kind of stuff. So it's that is one. I don't know if you call it a disadvantage, but that if your soil is not in good shape, if you don't have a lot of soil life, some of these methods may work better over time as your soil life gets built up. But that's the kind of stuff I love. Is like the really simple solutions that also don't involve a lot of machinery, and that's my own personal preference. I'm a plant nerd. I love plants, and I'm just fascinated by the way they grow. How happy can we make these plants? How productive can we make them? So that's why when I was working on this farm, spending a lot of time driving tractors, I realized that's not what I got into farming for. I want to spend time messing around with plants, not driving tractors. I realized there are some people who love equipment. I think there's some people who farm almost so they can drive a tractor, and so I realized that's not going to be a draw for them. Demechanizing. On the other hand, the roller crimper style no-till is employed by our organic farmers on larger acreages of corn and different things, and there's a lot of information out there about that, from Jeff Moyer's book to there's a lot of great information via the NRCS about the roller crimper style no-till, and so that would be something if people wanted to do larger acreage of. It does work on commodity crops like corn and soy and stuff like that, or if people wanted to do those larger plantings, tomatoes, squashes, potentially even sweet corn and stuff like that. If people already have tractors and like them and want to do no-till and scale it up a little bit, that would be one way. People could do that if they could do a roller crimper style no-till. use the tractors and do no-till on a larger scale. Because that's one thing that has come up a lot, both in the interviews in the books about, because some of these farms are on very small footprints. And so, the idea of whether you can scale it up or not has come up a lot. And also people, just when I run into people at conferences and stuff like that, and they, some of them are intrigued by the no-till ideas, but they're like, well, I'm already farming, insert number here, however many acres, bigger than the 1 or 2 acres that a lot of the farms develop their systems on. And people think, well, can you really scale it up? And I think you can. I think a lot of these systems, just because they were developed on smaller farms, doesn't mean that they only work on smaller farms. And so I think if you wanted to go a really big scale, like tens or hundreds of acres, you would probably be better off doing something with the roller crimper method. Just because that's really what roller crimper does, is it allows you can plant a cover crop on a very larger acreage more quickly with a mechanical seeder, come back and roll it down with a tractor. And so that, roller crimper would be one way to do no-till on a larger acreage faster. And then I think a lot of the other systems you could scale up to, for example, by, one thing a lot of the people talked about in the book was using a drop spreader instead of a manure spreader to drop compost as a mulch. Because if you're familiar with the way that a manure spreader works, most manure spreaders, they have these beaters that knock the manure, compost, or whatever you're spreading off the end of the spreader, but they kind of drop it in clumps, and the beaters kind of shoot it all over the place. Whereas there are a few companies that make drop spreaders that I've got them listed in the resources section of the book, that they wouldn't spread something as chunky as manure, but they drop it. The drop spreaders, they drop it much more evenly, and so that would be one way. Like a lot of the smaller scale farms use a deep compost mulch. Like they'll in step one they will kill the weeds or knock them back with solarization or occultation, and then step two they will both cut the bed and suppress the weed by putting a thick layer of compost. Anywhere from, I talk to people who would do 4 or 6 inches to get a bed established. A very common theme that I heard from people is that they would get beds established into transitioning away from a tillage system into a no-till system with a lot of compost, like 4 or 6 inches. And then as they got the system established, they had life going in their soil. The weed pressure was coming down since the weeds were being smothered. They could scale it back and do an inch or two of compost, or maybe even less. But one way to speed up that compost application on a larger basis, like I'm thinking, if you wanted to do deep compost mulch method on a larger acreage, you could get a drop spreader and apply compost very quickly to a much larger area than places where they are spreading it with a wheelbarrow, with a tractor, the bucket of a tractor, or something like that.
Yeah, definitely that can be an exhausting exercise on a larger acreage, moving it with a wheelbarrow. Voice of experience here. Yeah. Well, Andrew Mefferd, this has been great. I really appreciate your time. I love the book. I'm very excited about it and excited to point our listeners towards it.
Great. Well, it kept me busy for the last year and a half, but I'm so happy with what we came up with. Of course, we've in the editing process, we've gone back and forth on it many times, and so I've read the manuscript through a few times since submitting it, and it's the kind of thing where trying to get it done, it became kind of like a blur, and then going back through it, I thought, yeah, there's some really good stuff in here. It's the kind of stuff that I was hoping I would find. Just those little details of how people have developed their systems, and really what I wanted to know is the nitty gritty of how they get them to work. Because of course, that's just the interesting thing, and why I like doing farm tours is no two people farm the same way. And so I found the kind of things that I'm hoping to put into use on my own farm, and I hope other people find them as useful and interesting too.
All right, you all, if you enjoyed Andrew Mefferd, you can subscribe to Growing for Market and should. What a great publication. They do lots of no-till articles. It's super worth it. Also, pick up a copy of The Organic No-Till Farming Revolution, Andrew's book, at growingformarket.com at a 20% discount or wherever you get books, but, discounts are cool. And don't forget about the giveaway at our Instagram. That's at No-Till Growers. Also, don't forget about the Lettuce Masterclass from Ray Tyler at Rose Creek. If you need some inspiration, go listen to Ray's interview with the late, great Chris Blanchard on Farmer to Farmer. Bring some tissues, though. I'm serious. Really excited about Ray's class, and they kick a few bucks back to us when you sign up. So go check it out. Lastly, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast, share it with your friends and Facebook groups, join the Patreon, or find some way to support the show. Check out no-tillgrowers.com, and otherwise just farm like mad, you all. It's almost spring. It's crazy. You're awesome. We'll see you next week with another great guest. Thanks for listening. Bye. Do you hear Wendell? This is my life. I go to record, and my dog barks. It's pretty genius.